Bells told the hour as the sun burned white on the pale stone of the Great September, and the city gathered like a sea around its marble promontory. Heat lay over the crowd, a damp cloak of breath and garlic and tar. Children sat on shoulders. Fishwives shaded their faces with kerchiefs. The red cloaks of the city watch were spots of blood in the press. Pigeons wheeled and cooed beneath the spires and settled on the shoulders of stone saints whose eyes had never seen such a multitude. They hauled Eddard Stark up Baelor steps with iron rings biting his wrists. He moved stiffly. The old wound in his leg made a stubborn fire beneath his skin, an ache that echoed his every heartbeat. The smell of sun-warmed marble brought Winterfell to him unexpectedly, as if the heated stone were the great kitchen hearth and he a boy again with chapped hands, watching embers fall. He shut his eyes and opened them again on the sun and the crowd and the gold crown gleaming at the top of the dais. Joffrey Baratheon looked small upon so much height, a boy king ensconced between his mother's painted certainty and the pale masks of the Kingsguard. Cersei's smile was a knife sheathed in silk. Beside her, Ser Meryn Trant held his chin like a man who had never known doubt. Ser Boros shifted weight from foot to foot, impatient as a groom with reins in hand. Ser Mandon Moore observed the crowd as if counting coins. Below them all the High Septons stood in a robe so heavy with gems that a lesser man would have staggered. Oil and incense turned the air sweet and cloying. The headsman stood to the side with a long sword in hand, the sun making a blinding stream over its broad face. It was a northern blade, great and dark, and Ned's chest tightened to see it. Ice, his father's sword, his father's father's, the weight of oaths inside the steel. The man who held it was Island Payne, mute and colder than any winter sky. They put Ned to his knees. The crowd's sound was like surf on a rocky shore. He found Sansa in the shade of the canopy and almost could not bear the sight of her. She was pale as a lily, hands clutched, eyes begging where her voice could not. Arya was nowhere. Arya would be somewhere she ought not, where he could not protect her. He forced his breathing slow. He had begged the gods for one chance to do the thing that would save his daughters from the pit he had tumbled them into. The chance was here. The High Septon raised a ringed hand and the bells abetted. Eddard of House Stark. His voice swelled, echoing from white arches. By the mercy of our king, you are granted leave to speak before sentence is passed. Ned let his head hang for a breath. He felt the eyes like arrows and lifted his face to meet them one by one. The king who was not a king, the queen who had been girl and mother and lioness, the knights in dead white, the executioner without a tongue, the heat-trembling press of small folk who had loved his brother's friend and might yet love justice. I have come to confess, he said, and the words cost him less than he had feared because he had given them to himself in the dark 100 times already. I have come to confess treason, that carried like a thrown stone. The wave of it broke from dais to steps to street. Cersei's smile sharpened. Joffrey sat up straighter, and the Kingsguard's shoulders eased. Sansa swayed and caught herself. I plotted against King Joffrey, Ned said, forcing each syllable clear. When I should have bent my knee, I set myself above my duty, and my pride put all men at hazard. I confess my treason. I beg the king's mercy. He bowed his head, and for a breath the world held itself very, very still. He felt the weight of what he had not said, of truth like ice beneath thin spring snow, that the boy on the throne wore a crown that did not rightly fit. He shut the door of that truth and kept it closed. The price of it would be the price of his daughters. He would not pay it. A murmur rose, mercy. Mercy. It was a bird's wing beat at first, then a flutter, then a living thing that moved through the crowd until even the red cloaks were glancing at each other, faces uneasy. The High Septon made a slow circle with his hand for silence and put his lips to speak the well-rehearsed benediction of clemency and exile. Ned lifted his head again. Yet, he said, and the word was a flake of frost that stopped tongues. Yet I call upon my right under gods and men to answer my accusers in trial by combat. The silence after was so complete he could hear pigeons on the highest rafters, their small feet on stone. Cersei's lips parted. Joffrey's eyes went bright and avid as a boy offered a vicious toy. The High Septon blinked twice, thickly. In the body of the crowd there was a sudden ripple, like a fisherman's net pulled tight. "A trial by combat," Ned said, his voice steady as the north wind. "Before the seven, I will put my life and honor into the hands of the gods." "The traitor confesses," Cersei said at once, rising half a hand's height from her chair. "No trial is needed when guilt is admitted." "I confess words," Ned answered, and somehow he found some old iron inside himself to let them ring. Words spoken for mercy's sake, but the weight of them, and the truth that lies or does not lie in them, I submit to the judgment of the gods. Let the warrior decide between me and the crown. Murmurs spread again, this time sharper, cut with curiosity and the high pitch of sudden hope. The High Septon drew his breath as if pulling it through cloth. "A trial by combat is an ancient custom," he said, "and a perilous one. The king's justice is sure." "The god's justice is surer," someone called from the steps, a rasping old man's voice that others took up, then swallowed as the queen's gaze turned their way. Cersei's eyes were green wine in the sun. "This is foolishness," she said. "The law does not bind the king to grant a spectacle to a confessed. The law binds us all," a voice said mildly from beneath the shade of the rightmost arch, and Ned's heart stumbled because it was a voice he had known in council as cool water knows its jug. Varys stepped into the light as if the sun could not touch his soft silks. "It is not wise, my queen, to seem to deny the gods an invocation laid upon their altar. The small folk are all eyes today." He gestured delicately toward the press below, where 3,000 faces had become 6,000 ears. Joffrey shifted, uneasy between appetite and counsel. He liked the idea of blood. He liked it very much. He also liked to be cheered when he was magnanimous. He was a boy with a wolf pup's hunger and a snake's desire for the safe strike. He glanced to Cersei. She smiled with a mother's patience that could kill mice across a room. She leaned near and said a few soft words. "The king is merciful," Joffrey declared, and the crowd tensed as one. "He will grant this traitor his spectacle." The High Septon's shoulders sagged, then straightened. "Then it shall be so," he intoned, reaching for the phrases that clothed chaos with ritual. "The warrior judges, the mother witnesses, the father holds the scales. Let each side name a champion." "I shall be the crown's champion," Sandor Clegane said, too quickly, as if the words had been hanging like a sword over his tongue, the first drop of blood enough to let the rest pour. He stepped down from behind the king, helm under his arm so the burned ruin of his face showed with its crooked fleshy grin. He looked at Ned without malice, without mercy, with the unblinking stare of a hound that has been taught to expect pain and deliver it in turn. Cersei had not named him. For half a heartbeat her eyelids flicked, and then she smiled. Sandor was better than any of those fat white lizards at her back. He would kill whatever man came against him, and he would not stop to think of gods or small folk. Ned turned his head across the sea of faces, the red of cloaks, the white of stones, the shimmer of heat. If he named Robb, he named a boy half a realm away. If he named himself, he named a man with a leg that ached like winter and wrists manacled, made soft by a cell. If he named no one, "I will stand," said a voice that belonged to old songs, not to this hot day or this coarse city. It came from the throng of onlookers just behind the line of gold cloaks and was met at once by a dozen spears thrust to bar its path. "I will stand for Lord Eddard Stark." The man walked forward without hurry. He had shed a white cloak months ago with anger that could have cracked marble, but the sunlight still looked for it on his shoulders. The memory of it walked with him. His armor was plain castle-forged steel polished until it made men blink, and there was a white device upon his breast, a field without sigil that was somehow more defiant than any lion or stag. His hair had gone more silver than gold, his beard more winter than autumn, but his eyes were clear and untroubled. "Ser Barristan," the High Septon breathed, and a ripple like wind in wheat passed through the crowd. Cersei's fingers went still around the stem of her cup. "You are not sworn to the king," Meryn Trant said, uncertain whether to sound offended or relieved. "I am sworn to my own honor," Barristan said calmly, "and to the memory of a king you all loved when you were children and love less now that he is dead." He did not look at Cersei when he said it. He did not look at Joffrey either. His gaze settled on Sandor Clegane, and there was nothing in it but appraising respect. "Will you cross blades with an old man, dog?" Sandor bared his teeth. "Gladly." The High Septon cast a glance to the Queen. Cersei smiled as if she had chosen each moment on the dais and would do so forever. The High Septon lifted his hands toward the dome sky. "By the Seven," he declared, "let it be judged." They cleared a space. It took long minutes, the press reluctant to part, but the heat and the spear shafts convinced men to shuffle back. The white steps became an amphitheater, the wide landing before the doors a field no larger than a lord's bedchamber and 1,000 times more dangerous. Varys drifted from shadow to shadow with a careful smile that hid how avidly he watched. Littlefinger stood at the rear of the dais where the breeze touched his hair, and his eyes were quick as knives. Ned was hauled aside to the wall. They unshackled one wrist and left the other bound so that he might lean, his heartbeat in his ear like a drum. He could taste the cold of Winterfell's godswood in the back of his throat, though the day was hot. The eyes of the heart tree were on him, grief and patience etched into their blood-red tears. He had chosen a path that he could not take back. Sandor came with bare head and helm thrown down at the edge of the field. He carried a long sword with the easy familiarity of a man for whom a sword had always been another limb. His mail sang as he moved. Barristan drew a pale blade from a scabbard without ornament. There was a nick in the steel near the center where some other life had bent itself against his line and broken. The High Septon said the words and the people repeated them. The warrior's name went round the steps like a tide. When the last syllable died away, the two men saluted, and the Hound came in quick, testing, a clangor of quick beats against Barristan's slower song. The old knight yielded a step, then another. His wrists were supple, his eyes steady, and he made fewer motions than the Hound might have expected. Sandor was big, and big men who were not slow sometimes forgot how to think smaller. Barristan made a little circle with his sword, no wider than the rim of a cup, and turned Sandor's blade aside with the ease of a man who has poured wine for a lifetime. "Faster," Sandor said through his teeth. "As you like," Barristan answered, and he made the circle smaller. They traded blows that rang up into the Sep's belly. Sandor pressed, boot skidding, then drove Barristan back toward the step. The old knight took the edge of stone under his heel, accepted it, and let the whole of his body turn so that the Hound's sword shivered off his guard and whistled past his ribs. Sandor gave ground instinctively, angry that he had given any, and came again with more speed, less thought. He wanted to end it. The old man would end it for him if he did not stop wanting. But Sandor did not stop wanting. "Remember, boy," some voice long ago had told him, "fast you are, but fast without quiet is wind." Sandor's eyes flashed. He hated remembered voices. "Stilran." The crowd made its sound. Part moan, part cheer, rising and falling with each exchange. Sweat cast bright threads down Sandor's temple that caught in the puckered ridge of his scar. Barristan's breath came slower than the younger man's. His shoulders rose and fell like the tide. He let Sandor batter at him until the dog's wrists began to feel the weight of his own fury, then turned him like a fish on a line, letting him pull and pull until the pull itself brought him close enough. Close enough, and Barristan's blade flicked inside Sandor's guard. Not a killing stroke, a speaking stroke, an announcement. It scored mail and skin, and Sandor grunted. He stepped back like a man who had put his hand into a fire and withdrawn it to smell the hair. He looked at Barristan's face and saw no triumph there, only attention, and a sliver of regret that men could not live without doing this to one another. The world pressed close, incense and sun, the whisper of silk on dais. A girl's breath held until it hurt. Sandor laughed without humor. "Old bones," he said, and came in with a sidestep, then a cudgeling riposte that would have taken off a younger man's ear. Barristan bent under it, returned a cut that Sandor caught on the flat, jumped a half step aside as the Hound changed angles for the third time. That third angle had killed a dozen men in the Riverlands over the years. It did not kill Barristan. It did not touch him. The Hound felt something then, not fear, not yet. Something like recognition. Across from him, Barristan nodded almost imperceptibly, as if he too had arrived at some internal landmark, then shifted weight in a way that would have been invisible to anyone who had not lived his life with a sword in hand. Sandor understood too late what it meant. Barristan turned his blade over and down and made a cut that took Sandor's sword at the fulcrum of his own force. The Hound's grip tore open. The sword spun and sank quillins first into a seam between two stones. Sandor went after it with the blind reach of habit. Barristan did not let him have it. He stepped in and laid his blade along Sandor's throat so lightly that it might have been a woman's hand, and so certainly that men who were farther back saw a line of bright line like a drawn circle around the Hound's neck. Sandor stared into the old knight's eyes and saw nothing there that he recognized except a kind of weary decency. Fury vibrated inside him and then dropped like a thrown thing. "I yield," he said, not loudly, not softly, a word cut square. The sound that came out of the crowd had no name. It was wild and joyous and disbelieving. For an instant it seemed the whole city had breathed out and was not yet certain if it could breathe in again. "The gods have judged," the High Septon said, voice thick, eyes startled. "By the warrior's hand. Lord Eddard Stark is," he swallowed visibly, "is acquitted of the charge laid." Cersei stood so quickly her chair skittered and fell. Joffrey half rose with her. Island Payne looked to the Queen because he was a blade, and blades look to the hand that holds them. The Kingsguard's white armor might as well have been bone for all the blood that beat in them. "Seize him," Cersei said, and the word reached the nearest rank of red cloaks before the High Septon's next breath. The nearest rank of red cloaks looked past her at the High Septon with his hands raised, and at the crowd that was no longer a crowd but a storm, and at the Sept itself which was stone and beyond their power. Janos Slynt, who knew his city like a baker knows his oven, felt the hair go down the backs of his arms. The riot that would come if they took the man now would not be a riot he could douse with cudgels. It would be something else. He lifted his hand slowly, hesitating. Varys smiled as if he were watching a cat decide whether to leap from a ledge. "Your Grace," the High Septon said, and the gravel in his voice surprised him. He had not felt gravel since he was a boy and had his own hunger to answer. "The gods have spoken." "The gods speak through kings," Cersei said. "This man confessed treason, and was judged by combat in the sight of the Seven." The High Septon answered. The Queen did not blink. "He was judged once and will be judged again if we so choose." There were only a few heartbeats in which the city decided what it was. They were long heartbeats. Then something in the press burst. A woman began to sob and shriek in a voice Ned had last heard in Winterfell when a mother's child fell from a wall. A butcher threw his cap in the air and shouted until his face went purple. The butcher's boy's ghost, Ned thought wildly, and the thought almost unseated him. Men took up the cry, "The gods have judged. Mercy! Mercy!" A stone flew, not at the dais, but toward the high blue, as if the city itself would pelt the sky. Varys edged closer to Ned as if drawn by some invisible thread, fingers folded inside his sleeves. "Lord Stark," he murmured, lips hardly moving. "For today do not move. Let the bells keep ringing. This is a day for bells." Ned nodded once, keeping his eyes where they must be. Barristan lowered his blade and stepped away from Sandor, who wrenched his sword free from the steps with a wrench of his shoulders, eyes dark. "You'd have taken my head," Sandor said, not as a question. Barristan looked as if he regretted all deaths, even the ones that did not happen. "Only if you had insisted on mine." Sandor tilted his head, then gave a short, rude nod as if acknowledging a bargain made between men on a roadside. He turned away, wiping at his neck with the back of his gauntlet. Blood came away on his skin and it made him grin, small and private. He picked up his helm and did not put it on. Cersei had her hand on Joffrey's wrist. Her knuckles were white. She leaned in again, voice like a thread of steel. Joffrey's mouth flattened, then eased. He looked out at the crowd, unruly, not his, and gathered the tatters of a king's composure about his little shoulders. "The king hears the gods," he called, and the crowd went suddenly quiet in the hope that mercy would sound sweet. "He is not deaf. He is not weak." He paused, letting the words hang. "Lord Stark shall be remanded to the Red Keep to await further royal pleasure." The High Septon's mouth tightened, but he did not contest it. He had the gods. He would not have the Red Keep. He nodded, slow and heavy, and the bells took up their voice again as if to drown reason and anger alike. The small folk cheered because they had lived to cheer another day and because the man had not been butchered in front of their children. They would talk of today for a year. They chained Ned again. He kept his eyes on Sansa and saw the wet gleam in them and tried to make a shape of reassurance with his face. She mouthed something he could not quite read. "Save me," her mouth said to him in dreams when he was a boy. "Save me," the weirwood eyes say, though they never move. He nodded once, as if that were something a man could promise. They did not take him back to the black heat of the dungeons. Not that day. They carried him into the Red Keep through a postern gate while the city was still singing outside and brought him to a room that had once been given over to the Lord Hand's convenience. A table, a chair, a bed. He sat on the bed and the ropes at his wrists were chafing like a rope hauls a fish. He shifted to find any scrap of comfort and found none. The door opened without knocking because the man who entered did not ever need to knock. Varys stood there the way a spider stands in the middle of a perfect web. "You have made a day," he said. "I made nothing," Ned told him. "Barristan made it. And Sandor. Ser Barristan will be remembered as if he had grown golden in that hour," Varys said. "And the Hound as if a man could grow less dog by refusing to bite. It was well done. It leaves the queen with too many paths and none of them as clean as she prefers." He came inside and closed the door behind him. "This night will be busy. I come to tell you that we must be, too." Ned stared at him, bone-tired. "You set this in motion." "I don't so much set things as discover where they wish to go," Varys said with a modest tilt of his head. "Men are streams. One may redirect, sometimes with a beam of wood. One does not stop water except with a mill pond, and then only for a while." He met Ned's gaze. "You will not remain in the Red Keep past sunrise. There will be an attempt to move me. There will be a dozen. The queen will try to bring you before the king alone, with the Kingsguard, where no High Septon watches and no bells ring. Yet she will not, for the moment, dare go against the gods so nakedly under the full sun. But darkness walks swiftly when the lioness is hungry." Varys spread his fingers. "We must not let her feed." "You would smuggle me out," Ned said, hearing his own voice as if it belonged to some other man from the north who had not brought his daughters into a den and watched the beast lean in. "If you do, she will take Sansa's head for a cup ornament." "She will not," Varys said, patient. "Not yet. The city will not wear that blow a day after the gods have spoken so loudly. She did not see the pitch that gathered on the steps as I did, for she does not look down from her dais. If Lord Stark is taken from his cell and butchered, the small folk will riot and men you do not know exist will come out from under doorsteps like roaches from a barrel." Ned stood, the ache in his leg a chain that weighed him in place. "Arya," Varys' eyes warmed, "taken by an old friend. A brother will carry her north with his straw and his stench and his patience. She will hate it, and it will save her. Sansa, then, she would be left inside the keep with scorpions and honey both." He shut his eyes. "And Sansa? You taught her all the courtesies," Varys said. "The courtesies are armor of a sort and also knives. The Hound will not let men hurt her while she is of use. The queen values her living weeping more than dead quiet. I will watch her. I have ladies of the court who listen like curtains." He paused. "Lord Stark, it must be tonight. There are ships that will not be in the harbor in the morning." "Where would you send me?" "Not far," Varys said. "Far enough. To the Trident. There are rivers that still remember your brother's banners. There are hills that do not easily bend their necks. There is a boy now, a young man who has crossed the Twins with the weight of a northern winter behind him. He will listen when you speak, Only a blind fool would not. And a blind fool he is not, though he stands among men who would like him to be blind. His mild smile was a weapon so carefully made that only its maker knew it was sharp. You must speak to your son. Ned's hand went to his thigh as if to keep it from shaking. Robb with a host. Catelyn among her father's people. Riverrun proud and stubborn as ever. He imagined Winterfell's quiet. He imagined the things that had happened while he sat in a cell, and shame came up in him like tidal water. He had done what he could today to buy his daughter's life and found a path that might be walked without so much blood. But it was still a path through a forest of knives. Tonight, he said. Tonight, Varys agreed, and unrolled a map from somewhere in his wide sleeve. Now listen as if you were a clever boy. That evening the city changed as cities do when a wind shifts, subtle as a cat and then all at once. Word poured across tiles and down courtyards. No man who had been there kept the truth of it to himself. Women told men what the High Septon had said. Men told women how the Hound had looked when the old knight kissed his throat with steel. At 3 inns within the city's eastern quarter cups were raised to Ser Barristan, and a song was made up on the spot in which he was younger than he had been that afternoon. In a room not far from the Maiden Vault, Sansa Stark lay with her face pressed into a pillow and tried to cry without making a sound. In the end she failed. She had not cried as hard even when she could not find Lady's smell anywhere in King's Landing. As if the scent of home itself had been swept up and thrown into the sea. She loved that her father had not died. She hated that he had called her king cruel with his asking. A true knight would have forgiven and sent them all home in a flourish of trumpets. She realized, tasting her own tears, that she was not sure what true knights did any more beyond wear pretty cloaks. The door opened and closed, and she flinched into her pillow like a rabbit. "Don't startle," a rough voice said, and something in it gentled. "You'll give yourself a stitch." She turned with her cheeks wet and saw Sandor Clegane like a burned tree by the foot of her bed. He held a goblet in his hand, not to offer, just to drink. He looked as if he had been soaked in the day and wrung out. "You," her voice hiccuped, "you were very brave." "No," he said. "He was." He pulled at the goblet. "Would have taken my bloody head off like a turnip, that old wolfhound. Taught me a thing." "You yielded," she said. "Better than bleeding like a pig on the Queen's doorstep," he said. "Better for you too." His eyes skated over her face and away. "You keep to your manners. You keep to your bowing and your pretty words. That's armor. Don't forget it's armor." He took another swallow. "You want a song? That's what you wanted once." She shook her head because she did not trust herself to ask the one she wanted. He put the cup down and the gold made a small ring upon the table. He couldn't sing. She knew that, but the way he said no told her something else she did not have a name for. She wiped her face and sat up and folded her hands on her lap like Septa Mordain had made her. "Will my father be safe?" "Safe," he said, tasting the word as if it were beer gone sour. "Safe as a man can be when lions get hungry." She thought of the Queen and little Tommen, who had a kind face, and Myrcella who smiled. She thought of Joffrey who smiled and made it hurt. She pushed her fingers hard together and sat straighter. "I prayed," she whispered. "I'll pray again." "Pray all you like," he said, and there was no mockery in it. "Don't stop. In the darkness under the Red Keep there are tunnels that rats know by heart and men know only when other men have told them tales that sounded like lies." Varys led Ned Stark and 2 silent sisters as far as the old stones that once had been a well. He let them down in a harness, slow, patient, soft. He was a large man and the space was narrow. The silks whispered over the stone like breath. "Go on," Varys murmured, a whisper that belonged equally to the dark and to a bright council room. "Go on, my lord, and do not look back." Ned did not look back. He felt the cold in the earth long before his skin felt the night air. He walked between 2 men whose faces he had not seen, who smelled of old linen and clean metal, who did not speak. The 3rd man waiting at the bolt hole smelled of horses and the river and the cabbage of the poor. Yoren grunted when he saw Ned's face and Ned, had not known he could be glad enough at the sight of a man's dirty straw to want to embrace him. "You go south at dawn," Yoren said when they were mounted on rough horses with soft hooves and the city wall a dark line behind them. His voice was as quiet as that old god's wood in winter. "Girl's safe with me. She'll hate it all the way and be grateful later." He spat a dark shape into the dark. "Won't thank me. Tell her." Ned began and then shut his mouth. He did not know what message would not be a coil to wrap around Arya's neck. "Stay small," he wanted to say. "Do not let the big world see you. Tell her the next time she sees snow, she will be nearer home." Yoren grunted. "If I see her next in snow, that will be a bad day for me. Go on. We'll be ghosts of each other." They turned north-northwest first, to follow the black ribbon of the Rose Road until they could break away to the Trident, where the ridges grew sharp as knives and the river villages loved their own too much to ask names if a man paid for bread. The night closed around them with the thick damp of summer, and the rhythm of hooves and Ned's legs spoke to him until his teeth set. Barristan rode beside him wrapped in a scuffed cloak he had owned when he was a younger knight without much gold, and the old knight's eyes wore neither triumph nor apology, only wakefulness. "You will have put yourself beyond the Queen," Ned said after the night had gone an hour without a word. "I put myself beyond her when I took off the cloak," Barristan answered, mild. "Today I merely told her what the distance was. It will be a pleasant walk compared to the one I will someday take in my mind, when I pass all the faces I have worn in the name of duty." Ned thought of the faces he had worn. Husband, father, lord, friend. He thought of the face he had shown his daughters when he told them they were going south where it would be bright and safe. He let the anger come and then let it go because it would not help him hold the saddle. "Thank you," he said finally, and in the dark there was the shape of a nod. They moved like ghosts through a burned farm where the earth still smelled of fat. They forded a stream that had eaten a little village piecemeal for 100 years and was not done. They slept a little, not long, at the edge of an orchard which had been stripped bare by men with long arms and worried faces. And in the early dim they were moving again, thin and shabby, the kind of men who are seen and not remembered. The trident lay before them like a hammered blade, and the men who had bent it for their own use were not the ones who had bent it last summer. Robb Stark's outriders saw them first, 2 boys with winter on their cheeks and a too tight band of pride under their hats. The boys bore lances that wanted to be men. They brought them to an officer who had scars only a few weeks old and a suspicion that predates any war. Ned named himself, and the officer gaped as if he had met a ghost where he had expected a rumor. They built a tent because sometimes a tent holds a reunion as well as a hall. Ned heard the roar that went across camp like wine through pines and closed his eyes. The sound made the ache in his leg a friend and a candle. Robb came in smelling of horse and leather and boyhood stubbornness and fell to his knees as if he had found a shrine. "Father," he said, and the boy in him broke through his voice. Ned put his free hand on his son's head, feeling hair that had been cut without care because there was not time for care. "You've grown." It was a foolish thing to say, and it was the only thing he could say without weeping. They did not leave each other for a long while. When they did, there were other men waiting. Men Ned had known as lads, men he had never seen, men whose names would die with them in some field before harvest. The Greyjohn's laughter was a drum. Roose Bolton's eyes were quiet and cold as if it were always dawn. The Blackfish stood like a spear near Catelyn, who came into the tent as if she had been waiting at the door of a long hall where her husband had been a long time away. Ned would have left the war and the world for a time to put his head in her lap and not move, but the way she held herself told him there was no interval left in which to be a man with nothing to say. "You're alive," she said, voice deepened by restraint. "That is a miracle." "Barristan made it," Ned said, and watched knowing move through her face like the shadow of a great wing. She went to him and took his hands. Her fingers had more bone than he remembered. The war had eaten them both. They spoke long into the night, not only them but the men who mattered, not all of whom mattered for reasons Ned liked. The great John had the voice of a cathedral organ when he spoke of the North's honor. "We should name our own king," he said, punching the air like a man striking a smith's bellows. "Set the boy on a throne under pine, not under lions. I will call him king if no man else does. The North has had kings before, Roose Bolton said, and his voice floated just above the table like smoke off a cooling blade. We could have kings again, or we could have graves in soil that is not ours. Catelyn's mouth tightened. Our father taught us we were sworn to the Iron Throne. Our father did not teach us to bow to a boy with the wrong blood, the great Jon said. The word wrong fell like a stone into the cup, and those who would have pretended to forget the letters in Stannis Baratheon's neat hand stopped pretending. Joffrey is Robert's son, Robb said, too quickly. He had loved a king who had hunted in Winterfell and laughed loud and smelled of wine and hot beef. He is. Ned's eyes met Catelyn's. He had promised to keep a door closed. He felt the pressure of it with each breath. He looked at Barristan across the map. The old knight looked back, steady, waiting. There were men whose honor was iron, men who could hold truth like a heated brand and not flinch. He is not, Ned said. The words did what words do when they unmake something. The map on the table, the river lines, the oak leaf sigils, the marked roads, were suddenly laid upon sand. The tent walls inhaled and exhaled. Outside, men walked and urinated and cursed at rain that had not yet fallen. Ned told them enough. He did not tell them everything. He told them what Stannis' letter had said to lords all over the realm, and what his own eyes had told him when he had looked at a dead king's children and seen only a living queen's brothers. He told them that a king's line mattered to oaths and to gods, that he had tried to do his duty and failed at it and was paying. Stannis will claim, the Blackfish said. He has claimed. He is the sort of man who does not unclaim a thing. Renly has claimed already, Catelyn murmured. He has half the South in his banners and a Tyrell girl smiling upon his camp. Roose's eyes glinted. That is a smile that weighs much in these times. So we bend the knee to Stannis and ask his leave to remove our spears from the Lannisters' bellies? The great Jon demanded. We go home if he lets us? What then, Eddard Stark? Ned felt all their eyes on him, as if they were spears that would not pierce him and still could hurt. There was a path that his honor had always led him down, a straight path of winterdark stones. Do what is right, not what is easy. Keep faith with oath and blood. Pay the price yourself and not ask if you can afford it. That path had led him to this tent full of men who were waiting for him to tell them which piece to place upon a board that was larger than any of them. We have an oath to the realm, Ned said. Not to a family. The realm is a house. If you bind the north door and the east wall and the west tower with oaths and leave the south gate yawning, the next wind will make a ruin of it. The realm is a house. A house must have a king who is a king. He paused so he could feel the shape of each word. Stannis is the older brother. The throne is his by law. His claim is iron. There is a comfort in that lately scarce. The man would be a cold comfort, the great Jon grumbled. Cold holds, Roose murmured. Robb was quiet, which was a new thing. He had too often filled the space a lord would have filled with talk. Now he listened to words pass like whetstones over wetted edges. If we bend the knee to Stannis, he said finally, we ask what in return? Ned turned his face to his son. In the candlelight, Robb's hair was a dark red-brown and his eyes were his mother's. He still had some boy in his mouth. The man's mouth would come later, cut by whatever edges it found. We ask for justice and the right to keep our people safe. We ask the king to take the Lannisters' hands off our throats and to give my daughter back. Jaime Lannister is worth a daughter, the great Jon said. Worth a dozen. Catelyn's fingers laced. Let us speak to the fact that the Lannisters are not one creature, she said, and she looked at Robb because she had been waiting to talk to a son and general at once. Tywin thinks of coin and power, and he thinks his son is worth a war and an army. Cersei thinks of pride and a boy who is not what she would have him be. Kevan thinks of Tywin. Tyrion thinks. She glanced at Ned. He thinks more than the rest. Ned remembered the little man's eyes in the brothel where the books had been kept, sharp and amused, taking the city into himself like a thief takes purses. Tyrion will be hanged before the leaves turn, Ned said. If he lives. Tywin needs a mind in King's Landing, and he has only 2 and 1 is at Harrenhal. The imp has a mind, the Blackfish conceded. He wields it like a dagger in a room where others bring axes. Then he must be made to cut a different throat than ours, Ned said. We send ravens. We offer fair exchange, Jaime for Sansa. We say we will not do as they did with me, hold hostage and call it mercy. If they refuse, we march and burn only what stands in our way. They will refuse, Roose Bolton said, and when men looked at him, he smiled without warmth. The Queen's pride would not fit under a boulder, much less under any bargain. Then we see what the gods will do when men have done their part, Ned said. And we write to Dragonstone. I will write to Stannis and to his Onion Knight if he has one still at his ear. We will offer our swords to the throne if the throne will take our fealty without asking for our bones. They did not sleep much. Ned sat with Catelyn after the men left, and the tent was a faded kingdom of canvas in which only the candles knew the time. He told her the shape of his cell, the taste of damp stone, the way the light moved in the sept as if all the gods had turned their heads. She told him of Bran's fall with fewer words than it deserved because there was a pain in it that lived too deep to come at easily. He closed his eyes and saw Bran's small body falling and falling with no end. He had not been at the boy's bedside when he woke to find himself changed. He had been a prisoner under a city that did not love him. Shame gnawed. We will go home, Catelyn said. Not because she believed it would be soon, but because it was a song she could not stop singing or it would desert her. We will sit under the heart tree and watch the light. We will, Ned said, and something inside him dared to set a cup upon that shelf and walk away. The ravens went out into the morning and found all the hawks and vipers that waited for them. In King's Landing, Cersei crushed the letter with fingers that trembled only while she read it. Tyrion Lannister watched her and took a sip of wine and hoped it was not poisoned, because if it was, he would never taste anything so sharp and clever again. He had arrived riding his father's irritation like a mare and found the city a loaf of bread that had not risen properly. Dense in the middle, burned at the edges. Jaime for Sansa, he read aloud, because saying the words made them feel like someone else's to be dissected and not a family's to be grieved. And a guarantee that the North withdraws and recognizes Stannis if and only if. He glanced at his sister. A cunning word, if. This is Father's decision, Cersei said. Father will send me back an answer secured to a thick rope, Tyrion said dryly. Until then, the boy is king and the queen is mother, and the hand is a dwarf who has no patience for starvation in his streets or knife fights in his halls. He leaned back and laced his fingers. We could trade the girl for Jaime. Cersei's eyes flared as if he had slapped her. He is my son. So is the other one, Tyrion said with a thin smile, and Cersei's mouth went hard. We keep Sansa and slit her throat if we need a statement to the city? No. We keep Sansa and she becomes a symbol of our mercy or our hardness as it suits us. We could get more for her than for Jaime. He watched her flinch and enjoyed it. But Father will want Jaime back. He will not like that Stannis claim is a stone on a seesaw. He will want to seize the plank and send Stannis flying. We will not trade. Cersei's voice was iron. We will take. We will keep the girl and get Jaime back. We will win. Tyrion looked at her hands, white, ringed. And how will we get Jaime back, sweet sister? Shall we pray? Shall we ask the gods who judged so convincingly yesterday? Do not speak to me of gods, Cersei snapped. The fat fool had his moment. The city is ours. We have blades and coin and men who will do what they're told. Tyrion's smile went sideways. So you do. He drank, then set down the cup. Then you will not object if I begin telling some of those men what to do. He stood, adjusted his doublet. First of all, we will send Myrcella to Dorne. Cersei recoiled. You will not. We will, Tyrion said softly, and the softness carried all the way down past the bedrock to where dragons had slept once. We make the Martells a promise and we give them a princess. We make the Tyrells a lie that we will not keep. We make the city less hungry, and we wait for Father to do what Father does. And the Stark girl? Tyrion sighed. We weave her into the net until such time as we trade her for more than she is worth. I will not see her beaten. It earns us nothing but a corpse and a riot." Cersei stared at him long enough for him to hear the wind at the eaves. "See her then," she said. "See your performance of mercy." He did. He went to Sansa's rooms with 2 trusted men and a careful frown. He sat on a chair and smiled as if they were both at some pleasant picnic. He looked at her face and saw a child trying to be the sort of woman a Septa would be proud of. He remembered a different child standing in a courtyard with eyes like chips of old ice and thought that the Starks had been thrown into the city like a handful of stones into a pond. But the ripples had gone farther than anyone could have guessed. "We are at war," he said. "I am sorry." He was surprised to find that he meant it. "I will do what I can for you. What I can do is not as much as I would like." She nodded, hands folded like branches. "Thank you, my lord." He knew a lie when he tasted one. He did not call it a lie because it tasted better unlabeled. He told her small things that would make her days less sharp. He arranged for a Septa who would not slap. He made a show of berating a guard who had found sport in making her flinch. He left, and the Hound leaned against the wall outside as if he had grown there. "You won your pretty battle for the day," Sandor said. "Good for you." Tyrion met the burned half of his face and did not look away the way most men did. "You fought the one that mattered." Sandor shrugged, uncomfortable with honesty. "I fought the one that was in front of me. What is in front of you now is a thin-faced girl. Don't let the Queen's dogs chew her." Sandor's mouth twisted. "You think I take orders from dwarfs now? I think you've been taking them from bigger fools for longer," Tyrion said pleasantly and walked away, whistling a tune he had loved as a boy because it spoke of wine. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read Ned Stark's letter and did not change expression. He had the face of a cliff. The words struck it as waves do, and when they had struck and gone back with their white froth and their hidden currents, the cliff was there still. "He offers swords," Davos said, standing at the edge of a table that had served a Targaryen king who had burned men when counsel failed to please him. "He offers counsel. He will bend the knee to you as the lawful king," he says. Stannis' mouth was thin. "He should have bent it to me a year ago." Davos did not argue. He saw the glow in Melisandre's shadow, though the room was bright with morning. "Better late than never" is a phrase sailors use when they have come to port with a leaky hull, he said instead, mild. Stannis' fingers clenched. "The realm should have bent," he said, as if all the words he had spoken thus far were all pieces of that sentence. "It should not be a question. The law is a sword. If men will not keep it sharp with their eyes, it rusts." "Lord Stark will keep it sharp," Davos said. "He has bled for it." Stannis stared into some great distance he would never reach. "Renly will say honeyed words. The Tyrells will pour sugar upon him and call it gold dust." He made a gesture as if to brush away a gnat and brushed away a southern god in the same motion. "Make ready the fleet." "Your Grace," Melisandre said, her voice like red coals under ashes. "The night is full of power. There are ways. There are ways to do a thing without setting the world on fire," Stannis snapped. He caught himself and seemed to be frustrated that he had caught himself. He looked at Davos. "Write to Stark. Tell him he will have my thanks and his daughter, if I have the city, and a charter for the North that gives them more of their own laws than they have had for a century. The law is the law, but it has rooms inside it. We will open some doors for him. He will like the sound of latches." Davos' grin was brief and wry. "A man can like the sound of latches for the sake of ships and onions, Your Grace. Ships and onions hold a kingdom together better than songs," Stannis said. "Go." On the King's Road, Arya wore dirt as if it were a second name and bit the inside of her mouth until she tasted iron rather than complained to Yoren. Every time she had tried to talk about going back to the city, he had looked at her as if she were an ant thinking about climbing a kettle. "You keep walking," he had said, no more words than that, and set a pace that was neither hard nor easy and was exactly the pace she needed to survive. She learned to listen for men in the brush. She learned to look at the road and see where wheels had broken and when and how many. She learned where to piss and how to make her hands not stink like a privy after. She seethed. She looked at the sky and thought she could climb it and stab it for letting things happen. She dreamed of wolves with white teeth and woke with her hand clenched on a stick. She would go north and then south and then wherever she chose. She would not be someone else's choice again. At Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister moved stone and iron and found that stone and iron moved back. He heard one story out of King's Landing and sent for more. When he had more, he stood over a table marked with places where men had died and took a breath that smelled of parchment, strong wine, and damp. The castle held old smoke where dragons had licked at it. He loved and detested that smell because it reminded him that men like him had ruled such things and let them go. "Stark lives," he said to Kevin, ending many thoughts with 2 words. That complicates, but it simplifies as life does. He is not a martyr. He is a lord. Lords can be bought. Men who follow him can be bought. He touched a finger to a small carved fish to the west of a blue line. "Jaime must be gotten back. We will trade the girl if we must and take the cost on my account. We will not trade the boy. We will not let the Starks withdraw with honors." "Renly," Kevin said, because he was a man who floated ideas gently to see where they sank. Tywin's mouth tightened. "Renly will be dead or be king. There is a woman with him who will make him seem both at once. If he is not dead, he will know what to do with a city. I do not want that. The Tyrells are fat from grain and full of patterns. They are dangerous when they diet on glory." "Stannis. Stannis will come," Tywin said. "He will come as a storm with no rain. We will keep our powder dry. We will be ready to make the boy step down for a day while we pull him back up with strings around his wrists. Or we will cut strings." He sent riders and letters and promises as delicately crafted as traps. He sent word to Cersei that she might perhaps not try to be clever without an adult in the room. He told her to keep Sansa Stark well-fed and well-seen, lest the city convince itself that they were feeding the girl bones in a cellar and rise. He told her to let Tyrion be hand because a city with a dwarf at council would remember that anything was possible and therefore be too bemused to rebel. He smiled, faintly and without humor, and had a cup of wine that did not make him drunk because nothing ever did. The letter from Stannis came to Robb's tent with solemnity and reeked of salt and rank honesty. Ned read it aloud to men who made faces as if the words were bitter herbs and passed it across to those who would need to hold it in their hands to believe it. It promised a charter for the north and a princess for Sansa's hand if she lived, and law that was plain like a sword lifted in daylight. The great John harumphed and said it sounded less like a king and more like a clerk. Roose Bolton said it sounded like a knife that could be trusted to cut exactly where one wished it to cut. Robb looked at his father. "We send our swords. We send our swords," Ned agreed, and there was relief in the words, as if a stone he had carried under his breastbone had decided to lie still. They moved. The Riverlands moved with them. They burned Lannister farms when they must and passed others because cows can be more useful than torches. They took men prisoner and sent others home with a mark on the shoulder and a warning they would not forget. They wrote to the sisters and to White Harbor and swore that if the South would be a house, then the North would be its walls. Their letters went like leaves on a stream, caught sometimes by rocks, sometimes by eddies, sometimes by hands men thought belonged to friends. In King's Landing, summer boiled and stank. Tyrion put small stones in a large bowl and drew a chain up from the river that did not yet exist. He put bread into mouths and earned curses for it because bread is never enough when stomachs are pits. He balanced Cersei's anger against City Watch loyalty and pushed Janos Slynt toward a hornet's nest of new duties that would keep him harried and less dangerous. He walked the walls and thought of what it would mean to hold them. He watched Sansa standing at Joffrey's side once as the king scowled at a procession of tanners and thought that she had learned more than most girls ever would about how a smile could be weapon and shield, cloak and shroud. He saw the Hound watch her with a stare that had in it something that had no name and thought that sometimes even ruined men grew strange gardens inside themselves. He wrote letters that made alliances and letters that unmade them and letters that did both, and found that his pen was sometimes as heavy as a long sword. "You dance with ghosts," Bronn told him once, yawning as if killing men were less tiring than listening to politics. "They lead," Tyrion said. "I dance." Robb fought 3 small fights that were more important than one great battle. He thrashed a Lannister foraging party so thoroughly that for a week men would not cross a river ford even when there was no northern man to see it. He relieved a Tully village where the people had begun to boil leather and in doing so bound them to his banners with more than fear. He used night to move 2,000 men in a way that led a Lannister captain to send word to Tywin that the north had wolves that moved like mist. He did not yet believe his own legend, which was why he did not lose it. Ned traveled with the rear guard more often than not. His leg would not let him ride the point long. He spoke to men in little knots, the Umbers and Karstarks and Mormonts, the lesser bannermen whose names would not be remembered by minstrels and who would die anyway. He asked questions that told him weather and hunger and the temper of men and the small stories that make armies into more than a number. He thought often of Sansa and how she must be learning to do the same thing under a chandelier instead of a pine. He wrote to Varys with a clever hand and did not tell anyone that he did so, and the spider's answers came like rain in a dry season. Small but precious. Then the lion and the rose made vows in the reach, and Renly wore a crown of antlers in a pavilion where the breeze was perfumed with crushed grass and clover. Catelyn went to that camp because men who were not Starks needed to hear Stark truth. She sat under silk and smiled at a queen who was a girl and a boy who was a king and told them that the realm was a house and it needed a foundation more than it needed blossoms. Renly laughed and made a joke that would have charmed a Septa. Marjorie smiled and poured her wine herself and never once took eyes off Catelyn's face. "Why should we follow Stannis?" Renly asked. "He will be a poor king. I will be a good one. Men follow the good. Men follow law," Catelyn said and felt old saying it. "And bread. You have the one and can bake the other. That does not make your brother a ghost." "Then let us ask the gods to judge," Renly said, eyes merry with cruel light. "Shall I challenge him? May I use 7? I had better use 7. He has Melisandre and all that fire to set on the ground under me." He kissed his queen where the air might see. "We will go take a city with roses, and you can take your northern goat paths and your vows." They parted without love. That night Catelyn dreamed of a shadow with a man's face and woke sweating, clutching at air. She did not see a candle gutter in a red woman's hand 300 miles away. She only felt a chill that made the reeds at the riverbank seem to whisper. In the city, the starry September successor burst with new piety. The High Septon preached caution, then courage, then patience, then restraint, whichever men would hear, and wished privately for a quiet room. Tyrion wished for a quiet city. Cersei wished for Jaime. Joffrey wished for more fear. Sansa wished for a key that would fit into a lock that did not exist. Sandor wished for wine and silence and the absence of fire. It was a summer of wishes. It ended with sails on the horizon. Stannis came with ships that wore the Baratheon heart like a hole punched through their sails, and he came with the south wind, and with men who had not learned yet to be afraid of the smell a city gets when it has starved long enough to turn bitter. He came with law like a cudgel, and with Melisandre's red smile tucked away in his cabin like a charm. Davos stood at his shoulder and thought of his boys and of onions and of Seawater's music. On the walls, Tyrion set the last link of chain. He put wildfire in jars and prayed to no god that the blast would not take his city with it. He sent Sansa away from the worst of the walls and then sent her away from that away because nowhere was safe, and he was a man with 2 hands trying to keep a river from overflowing while a storm laughed at him. He let the Hound choose where to stand and did not tell him where it would be bravest. The river burned. This is a thing men will tell their sons, and their sons will call a story. The jars of wildfire burst and spilled green hell that clung and leapt and laughed. Ships became torches and torches became floating tombs. Men screamed, always. Men made that sound the way men breathe. Tyrion felt the blast strike his lungs and staggered and did not fall because he was too angry to fall. Stannis bore through it all with a face like a blade, because he had expected fire and found fire and did not care. There was only up, only forward, only the thing that must be done. The Hound broke. He had danced with death 100 times, and it had never looked so much like his brother's eyes. Fire was a hand at his throat. He dropped his sword and cursed and ran. knocking men out of his way, and there were tears on his face that did not earn him mockery because men were too busy dying. Tyrion sent other men into the gap the Hound left and felt something tear in his groin that might have been muscle and might have been courage and did not matter because he had ladders to kick away and a city to hold. Outside the city to the north, a horn blew that did not belong to any of the king's banners. It was a wolf's horn, and it made men on the wall turn their heads as if their bodies remembered something their minds had tried to forget. Ned Stark rode with the vanguard because sometimes a man's leg hurts and a man rides anyway when the day is too heavy. Robb rode like a man in a song. The Riverlands came with them. Not all, not even most, but enough to make the dust by the King's Road rise like applause. They had moved by night and reed and rumor, had circled, had taken guides who loved the Tully Blue and the fish it bore. They struck the Lannister reserve that waited to ride down any army that came late to the city's rescue, and they struck it in the flank and the rear and then the front and then the heart. Men who wore lion's colors for coin or fear broke first. Men who wore it for pride broke last. Even pride breaks. Tyrion heard the horn and did not know if it was enemy or friend. He saw the green fire eat a mast and found he did not care about masts anymore. He ordered a sally. He led it because there was no one else who would. He rode into a chaos that had started like a plan and become what all plans become when they meet men in heat. He saw a knight with a boar on his surcoat die with his eyes wide and a boy run past with a kitchen knife, and he struck that boy with the flat before he could bury it in anyone's kidney. He yelled until his throat was ropes. He knew, dimly, that if Stannis took the walls the city was lost, and if Stannis did not, there was still a man with a yellow rose who might come up the river road as if he had invented roads. No yellow roses came. The green rose of Highgarden stayed in the south with Renly, who did not come at all because he had died in his pavilion a week earlier with his men standing outside in the dew. His throat open like a second smile. They had split without their lord like a cart whose axle breaks. Both halves toppled in different directions. Stannis stamped forward anyway. Tyrion held anyway. Then the north struck the west of the Lannister reserve, and the lion's tail curled under its own belly. Part of it ran. Part of it tried to fight two wars in two directions and forgot to fight either well. Men die of such mathematics. Within the walls, Cersei sat on the iron through. Any with her son on her lap and a cup of wine in her hand that was not her first. She had sent for Sansa earlier and sent her away again because suddenly the thought of the Stark girl upset her. There was a ghost in the room wearing a white cloak, and she could not find whose it was. She listed to one side. The hall smelled of sweat and oil and fear. Ser Lancel bled somewhere behind her and would not leave until she told him to, which was noble in a way that made her jaw ache. The king whimpered. She stroked his hair and whispered of lions and teeth and pride and what one does when the world is too loud. She said nice things about herself to herself because she had learned that no one else would. The gates did not open. The walls did not fall. The day ended with Stannis ordering a retreat because he had not yet learned how to die and take his men with him for pride's sake. He learned to hate wildfire that night. He learned to hate dwarf cleverness and a city's refuse. He learned that even law had to make room for hunger and grief and guile. Ned rode under the walls with Robb and did not ride in because to ride in was to hand himself to the very city that still held his daughter. He sent a white flag instead, and a message. "We will trade," it said. "Jaime for Sansa. We will not storm when we can spare the small folk. The North declares for Stannis. When you are done starving and bleeding, you will need a king. Choose one." Tyrion read it and laughed until he coughed. "A poet," he told Bronn. "The North breeds them with a dour eye and a sharp sense of timing." Tywin came 2 days later at a trot that cleaned up what had been left. He took command with the offended dignity of a man whose meal has gone cold. He kissed Cersei's cheek and called her a fool with his eyes and sent letters that smelled of victory the way vinegar smells of wine that has gone wrong. He sat with Ned's letter and a cup of wine that did nothing and weighed men on the scale he had been building since he was 10 and had been told that his father was a joke. "Send for the girl," he said at last. "We will trade. I will not have my son rotting while we pretend that honey will draw flies to a battlefield." Cersei stared at him as if he had turned into a septon. "We have leverage in her tears. You have none if the city hates you, Tywin said. "You will learn this, and perhaps the result will not kill us all." He looked at Tyrion with that winter calm he kept only for numbers and death. "See it done." They brought Sansa to a chamber with a window that looked on a courtyard she had only ever crossed when her feet were cold or her heart was. Tyrion sat her down and told her in plain words that she would be sent from the city under white flags. She would go to a camp where men wore wolves on their breasts. She would see her father there if the gods smiled, and if the gods frowned, she would see her mother. He told her that she must walk as if the floor were glass and her step would be a city's temper. She tried to be graceful. She failed and began to cry and then stopped because she had decided she would not let any Lannister see her do that again. She thanked him because that was what surmounted the chaos. He bowed because he had seen kings fall when they forgot how to bow. The exchange was made 3 days after the river stopped belching smoke. They did it in the open ground north of the Gate of the Gods. 400 men on each side. 400 men counting. Jaime Lannister rode out between his guards as casual as a man going to piss behind a hedge, half a smile on his lips. Sansa came with 2 septas and the Hound, who walked beside her like doom walking on 2 legs and who did not look at anyone's face but hers, once and then the ground. Ned rode forward until the ache in his leg was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. Jaime's grin when he saw him itched for a fight that could not be had here. Sansa's face when she saw her father made her look again like a child who had not slept enough. She slid from her horse before anyone could help her and ran like a girl once more. Ned got his good arm around her and took in her hair and her breath and her shudder, and the world eased for a moment as if some great hand had shifted its grip. Jaime swung out of his saddle and looked around as if measuring where he might most quickly take offense. He met Robb's eyes, and something like respect moved through his mouth. "Young wolf," he said, "I hear songs. They must not sound well in your ear," Robb said, trying to keep his voice level. "They are not the worst I've heard," Jaime offered, extravagant as if giving coin to a whore. His eyes went to Ned. "Lord Stark. It seems we both have a knack for surviving things we shouldn't. A habit I plan to keep," Ned said. "Some of us have daughters." Jaime's gaze flicked to Sansa, softened almost invisibly, then sharpened again. "Some of us have sons," he said. "Give father my regards if you like. Tell him I appreciated the firm hand." "Tell him yourself," Robb said. "When next you see him." They parted without swords drawn. "This will seem ordinary in a generation," men will say. It was not ordinary to anyone who had been living it. Sansa rode with Ned and Robb and Cat to their camp. She said little at first because men were watching and because she had learned how to say nothing with the best. When they were inside a ring of trees and a ring of guards and a ring of love that no war could completely thin, she fell on Catelyn and cried like a girl who had lost a mother at the market and found her again. Cat stroked her and let her cry as if all the weeping Sansa had not done had waited until now and poured. Robb stood off to the side with his hands clenched and looked at his father over his mother's bent head, and they both felt the same mixture of gratitude and blame and love. They moved north and east then, their alliance with Stannis still a thing that needed kicks to keep moving. Stannis licked his wounds and licked his pride and did not break. He sent Davos to treat with them on points of law and bread and the assignment of garrisons. He insisted the king's justice would come to Winterfell to make certain oaths were kept. Ned told him the king's justice would be welcome, that his own justice would accompany it. They wrote charters, and the ink of those charters smelled of hope more than any ink has a right to, and of winter too. In King's Landing, Tywin sent Tyrion quietly away with a compliment sharp as a nail. He sent letters to Dorne and the twins and places less well lit. He said words to Cersei about restraint that she did not hear because she was busy making plans in a mirror. Joffrey pouted and grew and grinned and practiced cruelty on insects because the only thing that fit in his hand was a life smaller than his. Sandor left. He had stood looking at the fire that had been the Blackwater and decided that the city was a house he could no longer live in. He went without a scene because he hated scenes. He went without telling anyone except a boy with dark hair and blue eyes whose name he did not want to know because that could only end badly. Arya changed names twice and learned to sleep with one eye open and to trust a man named Jaqen just enough to stay alive. She thought of her father with the kind of fierce ache that makes a child into something else. She taught herself a little song to hum under her breath when she felt her chest get too tight. Needle, stone, water, tree. In the north, Bran learned to draw breath evenly when visions came and to speak less when men looked at him as if he were a storybook walking. He learned that ravens had opinions about men and men had opinions about ravens, and neither set of opinions mattered as much as the wind under a certain kind of moon. He learned that winter speaks a language that is best understood by saying nothing and listening. In Riverrun, Catelyn counted the days with thread and candle stubs and the beat of her heart. She watched Robb become thinner along the face where a boy becomes a man and does not know it yet. And she watched him play at not wanting to be a king and wondered if the world would let him not want. At Harrenhal, Roose Bolton looked into fires that were not green and thought about a knife drawn across soft warmth. He thought about oaths and their ends. He thought about how men always look at wolves' teeth and never at wolves' eyes. At Dragonstone, Melisandre smiled into the flame and saw a wolf running north and a wolf running south and a wolf running in place. She saw a stag's skull in shallow water with green shining around its antlers. She saw a woman with hair like wildfire lift a city with her hands and open it like a nut. But not this city. She told Stannis none of that. She told him a simpler story, that his path still ran forward and that the one true king's fire could not be quenched by green tricks. Stannis listened and frowned and did not sleep much. Winterfell's ravens came and went until the old rookery sounded like a market. Maester Luwin took down the scroll that had to be taken down, the one with the king's seal and the Stark's name written in a hand no man would call pretty or poor. He read it twice and 3 times and then once more because sometimes the strangest truth is truth. He looked out at the sky and thought of boys who were men now and men who had been boys who had done a foolish brave thing and had not died of it yet. Ned Stark went home. It was not the home he had left. The weirwood of the gods would took him in without commentary and shed a leaf that stuck to his hair like a kiss. The air smelled of damp and horses and the faint sweetness that comes before frost. He stood with Catelyn under the ancient bough and put his forehead to the carved face and let the tree say whatever trees say to men who have come back with scars. He built a great silence around himself and then filled it with work. He sent men to the neck and to the White Knife and to the hills above the Dreadfort. He sent letters to Bear Island that spoke of daughters and of Mormont women who had been famous when they were girls. He sat at table with Glover and Reed and Hornwood and did not frown when they took themselves, and their insults, seriously. He set Bran at his right hand and taught him how to ask questions that made the answers useful. He let Rickon howl in the yard until the howling had no shape and then picked the boy up when it turned into a child's hurt. Sansa sat at the window and sewed in the early days, because what else is there to do when one has come from lions' dens? Then she found that the sound of the training yard did not sound like danger anymore. She learned to ride again properly on a mare that trusted her. She learned to listen to old stories for where the sharp edges had been smoothed down and not to cut her hands on them. She wrote a letter to a boy who would be king if more things had been simple, and she burned it, and in burning it felt something in herself cool. Robb knelt in the great hall with men around him and spoke the oath again. To the realm, not to a face. He felt something in his chest settle into a place it had been trying to find. He sent men to Stannis, and some came back with a hard-won respect that did not feel like love and would have to suffice. He took counsel from his father even when he did not like it and learned to swallow the taste of his own pride. He listened when the Blackfish told him a thing was folly and when the Great John told him a thing was glory. He learned that both loved him. In King's Landing, Joffrey sat on a throne and gradually learned that to have a crown is not to have power. Power was in letters and kitchens and beds, and Joffrey could not reach those places because he had built curtains of fear around himself and found that he could not pass them either. He slapped, he punished, he ordered a singer's fingers broken, and each act made something else smaller in him and something else larger outside him. Cersei arranged and lied and won small skirmishes that looked grand from the Red Keep but shrank in the light. Tywin bought men. He bought peace in hills with careful gold and war in plains with careful lies. He sent a great and handsome letter to Winterfell proposing a marriage that would end some of the knives that pointed at his heart. Ned read it and smiled how one smiles at snow in a month when it ought to be rain. "What does he offer?" Catelyn asked at breakfast, buttering bread with a degree of attention that told on her nerves. "My daughter to his grandson," Ned said. "A Lannister in Winterfell. The old jokes would be richer than Tywin's chests." Catelyn stared out at the yard where Sansa was walking with Bran, and her mouth tightened.
Ned waited.
The weirwood outside waited. Winter waits for everything. "No," Catelyn said at last. "No," Ned agreed. He wrote a letter in which he was polite and dry and impossible to mistake, and when he sealed it he felt lighter than he had in weeks. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn kept her son's hand in her own and wrote to no one and prayed to the maiden and the mother and the stranger in turns. In Sunspear, Doran Martell read the letter about Myrcella and made a small sound of something that might have been pain. In Old Town, men in gray read the wind and did their sums and put a pin in a map where the winters come. There was not one end to this story because the realm is not a story. There were 100 ends, slow and quick. A boy in the gold cloaks who found religion and left for the quiet isle where he would learn to wash feet. A Lannister cousin murdered for debts by a man wearing a boar's tusk. A Tully thing that became a marriage that became a babe that became a lord who would turn up in the third act of a play and ruin careful plans by putting his spoon into the wrong bowl. There were 3 wolves in the wood north of Moat Cailin, a mother and 2 grown young, who ran silently where snow held off and thaw crept in, and their tracks crossed a set of tracks that men would have called inhuman if they had had the courage to see them. Ned knelt in the godswood and spoke aloud to the tree because he had found that a grown man sometimes needs to say things aloud to a face that is older than men. He said, "We walked in fire and lived." He said, "I did what I could." He said, "Teach me to do what is left." He listened. He rose. In time, Stannis would come north with a hard mouth and a hungry army and find in Winterfell a lord who would bend the knee in such a way as to remember his backbone. In time, Melisandre would stand in a courtyard and call down a shadow that would not come, because something older had put out a hand. In time, a girl with 1 wolf in her heart and 1,000 names in her head would cross a sea where no one knew any of those names and find that there were faces that fit her bones like they had been waiting. In time, a queen across the water would hear a rumor of a Stark who had escaped death by calling down the gods in a city of spires and think that perhaps the world could be coaxed as well as conquered. On a day when the first flakes of the new winter fell, Sansa stood on the parapet and watched them melt on her palm. "If I had sung a different song," she said, and did not finish, because she had learned the trick of stopping when a thing did not need to be said to be felt. Ned came to stand beside her. "We sang what we knew," he said. "We learned the rest." She nodded, and the snow fell softer. In the end, the realm did not become a house because one man had said so on a hot day in a city full of incense. It became a house because men hammered and women baked and children were born and died, and the laws were kept often enough that the cracks did not let in too much cold. The gods were invoked and sometimes listened and more often did not, and men learned that this was not a contradiction. There were winters and thaws. There were wolves in the dark and men with knives and candles and a little laughter even when laughter was punished. On the day he died, years from that hot hour, Eddard Stark would sit under the heart tree and look at the pattern of light and shadow on his hand and think of the space between, and he would remember a boy king's face and a dog's hard eyes and an old knight's gentle blade, and he would give thanks for the thing he had once done that had saved a daughter and a realm from a worse shape. He did not know yet that this was so. He only knew that the bells had rung, and that the gods had spoken through 2 men who had put steel between law and pride. He had knelt and risen and found his feet still under him, and as the first winter wind touched the top of the godswood's leaves, he smiled into its chill and let it fill his chest, and the North knew him, and he knew the North, and there are worse endings. There are worse beginnings. The bells of the Great September would toll other hours and other judgments. Men would tell how the Hound had yielded and the old knight had not wavered and the hand had called the gods down into the street and lived. They would tell it wrongly in time. They would say that Ned Stark had shouted at the queen and the Hound had wept and Ser Barristan had had white wings. It did not matter what was added. The bones of the thing were true. The gods had been asked, and the gods, for once, had reminded men that they were listening. And in the cold halls of Winterfell, in the warm terraces of Sunspear, on ships, in keeps, in hovels, that memory kept a dozen hands a little steadier than they might have been. So the realm held, not without cracks, not without screams, with winter at the door and the door braced against it, with daughters kept and found and taught to keep themselves, with sons who learned to listen to the sound of law and love even they did not call it that, with men who have been dogs and men who have been gods and men who have been something in between, with women who learned to carry knives inside smiles, and the bells in the city of steps and shadows rang at odd hours thereafter, as if the bronze remembered a day when law and blade and prayer had braided together and could not quite shake the memory loose.